Welcome to Cambodia Business Week. This week we are going to talk about the microfinance industry, and we have two guests, one representing the Cambodia Microfinance Association. So welcome, Mr. Sovanna.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, my pleasure. And from Chamrouen, did I say it right? You have to correct me.
Chamrouen.
Chamrouen.
It's a Khmer name.
Okay. What does it mean?
Mean prosperity.
Okay. Did you know that?
I did.
Okay. We have Yannick Milev. Milev. Always my bad pronunciations of French names, so I apologize. We welcome you represent a microfinance institution itself. So we have the association, we have an institution, and so we're going to get a well-rounded story about what's happening in the microfinance market. So first, let's do a little introduction of yourselves.
Mm-hmm.
You're obviously Cambodian.
Yeah, I am.
So where are you from?
Fortunately, I gonna make it very brief. I've been with the industry representing the Cambodia Microfinance Association for more than 2 years. I joined the association back in 2015 after completing two master, one in master's degree, one in management and one in risk in the banking and microfinance sector.
Okay, where are you originally from in Cambodia?
Yeah, I'm from. Actually, I was born in the Cambodian-Thailand border.
Okay.
Back in the early 1980s,
Okay.
and
So you speak
migrated.
Thai?
Very little.
Okay.
Very little. Migrated into Cambodia in the early 1990s, and continue to be one of its devoted citizens.
Okay.
Because never leave the country.
Okay. So devoted citizen.
Yeah.
Okay. And Yannick, where are you from?
So I'm a French national,
Right.
And I grew up in the States, did some studies in the UK and in France. I studied sociology and development studies, so actually I don't have any finance background per se, but learned over the years. I've been around 15 years in doing microfinance, in Africa first, in Ghana, and then in some support to microfinance institutions from a foundation in the UK, and then in the Philippines, and now in Cambodia.
Microfinance by trade.
By trade.
By trade.
That's right.
Okay, so just to give our listeners some perspective, microfinance institution is effectively a banking institution. Would that be fair to say?
A bank for the low-income population.
Right. So it's regulated by the National Bank of Cambodia.
Yes, it is.
And,
Fortunately.
Fortunately. And it effectively, the structure of the financial institutions, the banking system is you have commercial banks, specialized banks, and microfinance institutions. Those are the sort of three main categories of banking institutions.
Yes, and but the National Bank of Cambodia also regulated other actor, financial actor, including financial leasing company, foreign exchange, and credit operator, the small company or small NGO who provide credit to the poor.
Okay. So there are also non-deposit taking and deposit taking microfinance. So there's a difference, obviously, in that one can take deposits, and so there's different capital requirements and regulatory requirements for those. Correct?
Exactly. Yeah. There's a different minimum capital requirement as well as a different set of regulation. In terms of capital requirement, the microfinance deposit taking institution, the legal title, is required to be at $30 million. For the microfinance institution, lending institution, only the capital requirement is $1.5 million, effectively at 2019.
Okay.
So gradually they have to meet that minimum capital requirement.
So getting down to the consumer. So what's the main differences in your customer base versus a commercial bank?
Well, I think that microfinance institutions typically have a last mile approach to the lending services. So they'll have a business model whereby the delivery channels by which they offer services will not just be branch-based systems. So they'll have either agents or loan officers that go out to the communities,
Okay.
interact with them, and provide some of the services there directly, and really try to reach out to those customers that might not be targeted or bankable by the more formal banking institutions.
What's your typical profile for your customer?
So for us, a typical profile will be a woman in about 80% of the cases.
Really?
Who are
Or 70% of the whole industry.
70% of the whole industry.
Yeah, for as a woman. And what Yannick said, the delivery of the service as a last mile approach, I think it's the beauty of the microfinance sector, is that we go to out there and talk to people, educating them about the sector, the financial access. Also, but it also happened to be a burden, because doing that incur a lot of
More costs.
operating costs.
Sure. I guess my question would be on this would be, I mean, like insurance, you have agents. They go out and seek customers and effectively market and sell the product. Is it microfinance institution different in the sense that you're going out to sell the product? 'Cause I think when I'm formerly a commercial banker, so we normally had people coming to the bank saying, "I need money," more than having to go out and look for customers. I mean, you obviously had competition. You'd want a customer that was at another bank, but is it like you actually go out and look for customers rather than they come to you?
Yeah, definitely. Promotion strategies are really to go out there and promote the services and explain, what is responsible access to finance, what you can use the loans for, and really have that kind of close communication. I mean, historically, microfinance is really about village-based systems where there were groups there who were set up, who were liable to each other, and who were accessing services from a provider that had capital there to help those people, aid with agriculture related. I mean, historically. And that has kind of expanded and developed to other areas, urban areas, where there's still that approach to, offer those services at the community level with a range of education and sensitization to ensure responsible access to finance.
Remember that the main target of the microfinance sector is low income rural population, and normally they have very limited knowledge of financial. So it's important for us to go there and explain and talk to them, get them comfortable accessing to the finance when they need.
So I guess then most of your customers are farmers.
Actually, for us, no. It's probably around 20%.
Right.
Because we historically are working primarily in urban centers. So there is urban poverty and populations within the urban markets who have also who are excluded from formal banking services, either because of the assets that the family may not have that will enable to access loans from banking sector, or also because they just don't have the information about how banking works and what it is that you need to do. But they do still have business activities that are there that require financing,
What type of business activities would you normally come across?
So it could be small buy and sell shops, traders, linked to cooking, so small restaurants, small transportation services, motodop, for example, tuk-tuks, so all this range of kind of service and buy and sell. I'm talking urban here, and that kind of urban focus would be essentially, those types of services.
Okay, I guess besides some of the newer developments anyway in the industry is the capital requirements being raised. So how does Cambodia compare with other countries in the region in terms of capital requirements?
I think it the right time that
We should explain what a capital requirement is as well. I guess we're
Right.
assuming as old bankers said that everybody knows what we're talking about. But what is a capital requirement mean?
it's the minimum capital that you have to have in order to be legally licensed to operate in that business. For example, commercial bank has been the minimum capital for the commercial bank has been raised to 75 million.
And that basically
US
means
dollar.
shareholder funds. I mean, in an accounting point of view, it means the investment by
Right.
the stickability of that investment in the institution, right?
Yeah, and I think it's right time that the central bank consider this, and because you also need the commitment of the shareholder in the sector, and the market is sophisticated enough for the national bank to start looking at raising the
And-
minimum capital
And
requirement.
specialized banks at 30, I believe, 35.
No, 15. As far as I know,
Okay.
15.
15.
But it's still it's a question of the effective full effectiveness of that capital requirement that we are at the microfinance sector talking about. Some of the member of the association has some difficulty because there's development within the sector that make them having some challenge meeting the requirement
Okay.
at this moment.
And how many microfinance institutions are there?
Um, at Cambodia Microfinance Association, we have 61, including microfinance deposit taking institution.
There's
There
four of those, I believe, right?
7.
7 now. Okay.
Mhm.
All right. And those are really competing with banks nowadays.
The MDIs, the
Yeah.
deposit taking.
And the rates are much, much higher. I mean, what would a typical rate for like a year be at a...
Well, I think if you factor, because if you talk about the interest rate relative from one MDI to a bank, they're different. But if you talk about what we talked earlier, that the MDI and the MFI staff have to go down to the community, talking to people, they riding a motorbike, and there's reason involved, the cost involved. I think because the operating cost could be as high as 30% for some bank, for some MFI. I think Chamrouen operating cost is also one of the highest, right?
Yeah, working towards improving that. That's
Yeah.
that's essentially
no.
You put them on the spot. Right?
Well, but I
Why
think-
is your rate so high?
but with Yannick at the ham, I think they looking at it and try to improve the effectiveness
Of course.
but we are dealing with people in the community.
Right.
It's not a branch based business, so that involves more cost than in the commercial bank sector. That's why the difference in
Right.
interest rate.
So the capital requirements changed, and there was also a recent, and I guess revisiting a PROCUS rather than a new PROCUS. A lot of people think it was a new PROCUS, but effectively there was an interest rate ceiling that was probably the best word is enforced, and that's at 18%. So that's affected the industry a bit. And what was, I think we were talking that the rates before could have varied from 30 to 40% possibly, right?
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
I say from 26 to 45, but I mean, within those regulated, obviously some people will charge higher than that. But within the regulated, I'd say that's probably the range that we could have.
Yeah, before the interest rate
before the
cap,
interest
yes.
rate cap.
But Cambodia is still one of the very good interest rate microfinance sector in the world, particularly in the region. We are
Well, now
better.
even better at 18%,
Uh,
right?
I think so.
Yeah.
I'm not an expert in regulation and legality, but what the 18% say, there's discussion about this, and many said it's part of the civil code, and the national bank simply just enforce it.
Yeah. That's,
But we can still, I mean, that's something need to be debated about. But what we now have to do is to work with member, the Association of Microfinance in Cambodia have to work with members, MFI, and the regulator, the central bank, the National Bank of Cambodia, to get it fully implemented. It meant that the 18% will be applicable and implemented by all the MFIs.
so that is a pretty significant development. I guess the question I would have then is how has that affected the market in terms of are there more people taking loans now that they're cheap? There's cheaper access to finance, and how are you managing the fact that your revenue has a ceiling effectively on a customer basis because we now have this interest rate cap?
Yeah, so in terms of impact on the market, maybe I'll let Sovanna answer that. I mean, it's hard to determine at this time exactly what the impact is going to be.
When did it go in effect?
April 1st.
Okay.
So it already, it's only for 4 months.
Yeah. So I mean, we've definitely seen a move towards increasing loan sizes, because one thing we didn't mention in the high operating expense ratios is, yes, there's the need to go to, extra operating costs to go and provide those loans to the last mile and to those communities, but there's also the fact that those people need smaller loans. So the transaction costs per dollar are actually much higher for microfinance. And one of the responses to the interest rate cap has been to increase the loans amount, because clearly that's going to be a way to be more efficient and to generate more revenue. And so we don't know if that's going to happen yet. Could there be a gap now for smaller loan sizes in the market? We don't know. There's quite a few actors who are out there who are committed to those smaller loan sizes and to diversifying their activities, but still maintaining a good part of that. So hopefully the sector will respond in a way that will enable that.
I just want to emphasize on what Yannick mentioned. Close to 1 million borrower borrow $1,000 or less, and with that amount of loan, if you talk about percentage in terms of interest rate, it's higher compared to other type of loan, other loan size segment. But if you talk about absolute amount, it's not really high. And that number one. Number two, the Cambodia Microfinance Association has encouraged members to continue and to commit to this low-income population, meaning to keep continue serving that $1,000 or less, so that they would not be able to turn to other source of financing, for example, loan shark.
Yeah, and that I guess is also a very important distinction and question. You're serving the community in a sense very well, in that prior to really the expansion of microfinance in these communities, there was actually more like a black market lending, right? I mean, there were people lending, you call loan sharks, but I mean they were servicing their purpose, providing funding for extortionary rates, but that's besides the point. So I mean, to give an example, what would the rates that in the black market have been, or what are they, like 100% or 50%, and you guys are coming in at now like about 18, right?
Yeah, I mean, people have quoted percentage in the thousands,
really?
With the daily percentages and things like that in terms of informal lending. I think you can see kind of everything under the sun there. And some of them serve a purpose and a role in communities in terms of informal lending. I mean, it's you can't look at it in a black and white sense, and it's still very much present today. I mean, the expansion of microfinance and development in Cambodia, which has been tremendous and positive, hasn't taken away from that. It's still a very thriving sector, and I mean that's part of the whole regulatory work as well. Basically, working down. So with this new credit operators being regulated, and now the minimal capital requirements, I mean, there's a work to try to clean up and get as many of the actors who are there for there to be oversight, which is important in terms of client protection.
Right. Is most microfinance collateralized lending, or is it uncollateralized?
In terms of portfolio percentage, it's collateralized.
Is it mostly title, like soft hard title?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
In terms of percentage of borrowers, though, I would say probably uncollateralized by group loans and joint liability methods.
Right.
So I don't know if you would agree with that, but
I think I agree to an extent, because there's group loan that you need to group people together and offer a very small loan. That they guarantee against each other, they don't have collateral, and that also represent a majority, a big chunk of the number in terms of number of borrowers.
Okay, and I want to talk about the growth of the industry, because the growth has been pretty phenomenal over the last 4 or 5 years. How has the microfinance industry expanded over the last 4 or 5 years?
I think we have to remember that we grow from a very low base.
Right.
So when you grow from a very low base, you tend to go faster. but at some point, particularly if you're looking at 2016 as compared to 2015, the growth is not has been the growth rate has been slow a bit. So it used to be 40% plus
Yeah.
annually until 2015, but 2016, if you exclude the growth of Sovanna, who also engage in small loan, it's around 10%.
Yeah,
So I think it more of an adjustment to market reality, but it also signaled the maturity of the sector.
Okay, and what has spawned the growth over the last 5 years? From what was the catalyst all of a sudden to see this, like you said, 40% growth?
Yeah, well, I think we could even take it about 10, probably,
Yeah,
years in
that's-
terms of growth, yeah, right?
Yeah, in the aftermath of global financial crisis, we have the growth has slowed, but after 2010, I think it picked up again.
Right, yeah. And there's been huge investments in funding of microfinance in Cambodia. And Cambodia had actually the largest exposure in terms of foreign direct investment in microfinance. But that was in 2015, which, considering the size of the country,
Right.
it was larger. Now India has just come in front. But if you compare, obviously, the size of India and Cambodia, I mean, it was very impressive. So there was just huge investment, lots of opportunities seen there as a market where there was need for those services. And there's also a mature kind of regulatory framework, a good, business environment generally that kind of convince investors to come in and be confident in what Cambodia had to offer. Good portfolio quality as well. There's the lending culture here is very positive. So we didn't see much defaulting. So it's just a very comfortable environment for investors to come in and some of them with some quite commercial intents, and others without. So traditionally it was social impact investors that were coming in with less intent on return on equity, but
Right.
And that's changing today as well in terms of the profile of the investors who are coming in.
So in summarize, what has been the factor supporting the growth? What Yannick said, I think number one is the economy.
Right.
We've been growing phenomenally as well as a country. And secondly, because of the favorable, conducive regulatory framework environment. The sector has been has come to this point because of the support of the regulator, the policymaker. So they've been a great supporter of the industry, and by extension to the people who need the service. And thirdly, I think the AMIFAC, the operator themselves, has been relentless in improving the professionalism, the efficiency, and the quality of their service and product, and together with the lender, impact investor, and development investor as well coming to support the sector. And fourthly, I think there's a need of the service in the market. The people has a need to improve their life with much with expanded business activity, and need for financing. So I think these four factors could summarize the factor that support the growth during the last several years.
And I guess in terms of assets, how has the industry compared now to the commercial banking industry?
We're still way behind them in terms of
Yeah. Is it? So it hasn't. It's.
well.
'Cause I think there was some rumblings from the commercial banks. They used to like to eat their lunch a bit.
Well,
Because
there
you
has
guys were
been some
going.
conversions of some of the big MFIs into banks. So I mean, they're kind of eating our lunch in the sense as well.
Right,
in that
right.
sense, yeah.
Right. Yeah, there's some bank who now venture into small loan provision segment. So I think that holds true. There's competition upstream as well as downstream.
And some the microfinance institutions actually started as NGOs. Is that correct?
Mhm.
And
Yeah, well, which is the case for us. So
Right.
we started as an NGO program for 3 years and then converted into a licensed MFI once we were sustainable and had reached a certain level of operation. So NGOs can sustain operations now. It's more regulated now. They can do it up to a certain level of portfolio, but then after a certain size, the idea is that these small programs that can be with an NGO who has support to small activity. If they reach a certain size, they should apply for the license and convert into a regulated by the national bank. Yeah.
Okay. What's the future of the industry?
That's my take on it is that there's still quite a bit of opportunity there for growth. There's still room in rural areas, need for expansion. I think there's a maturity that needs to happen as well in terms of diversity of services that are offered. I think there's a lot of work for different types of, money transfers, for access to technology. So I think that's going to be one of the huge developments.
So we're seeing now more online.
Online, I think that's some while to come until microfinance really engage with online. But I would say through mobile payments and all the fintech, that can come in. Yeah, so I think there's going to be huge, and actually the interest rate regulation has, I think, brought a lot of the MFIs to consider this because of the efficiency that all these innovative technologies can bring.
What about consolidation in the industry? There was some purchases. I guess some corporate finance transactions. So do we see consolidation in the industry?
I think it's a market force that some point when you see a strategic goal to consolidate, then you will consider it as an operator. So I think it's not a question of whether they should do it or not. I think it's a question of when they should be starting to consider it seriously.
But keeping in mind that there's still new actors coming in now, so there are also there are consolidations happening, and there are also new licenses being offered.
And it's hard to get a new license these days, right?
It's hard, but I mean it's being done.
Right.
So I mean I think there is strong scrutiny, which is good, about the new actors coming in, about who the shareholders are. What's.
Remember, consolidation is not just in the form of capital or injection or buying shares. It also about some strategic option, including technologies and technicality that you think would be worth to consolidate or to acquire or to merge. I think this and other factor would determine whether that would be a market force in the future. One thing that I should state is that microfinance used to be a straightforward lending business, but in the late 2000, they start taking deposit, and now what they have to do is to not just diversify it, but to also bundle the traditional lending service with other, including remittances, payment, mobile banking, all sort of things that used to be not considered seriously by the microfinance operator. Insurance as well.
Okay. And recently, I guess the industry pulled together on one of the things that the government, I guess, attempted to introduce, which was this VAT on services, right? So it's the industry acted together and sort of said, we don't think this is fair, and the government actually listened.
Yeah, I think it showed the leadership. I think it demonstrates a willingness of the government, the tax authority, toward the private sector. Remember, VAT is for the end consumer, so anything that we would be asked to do, it will be passed to the end consumer, and I think the government see this, and other factors as well, because implementing VAT within the microfinance sector and banking industry is complicated, and it in many of them, it's a huge investment.
Right.
Now, we should focus on serving the people. We should focus on expanding to the rural, unserved area, and then investing on this. But having said that, I think the government, the tax authority in particular, has been willing to listen to the private sector, and they are very kind of favorable in considering all the options, and now we will work together to see how we're going to implement the VAT in the banking and financial industry.
Okay. And what do you see of future developments in the industry? What do you see for the future of the industry?
Yeah, well, I mean, beyond what I just said before, I mean, I think that, for me, it's important to keep a diversity of actors and I think that, all this consolidation and that is happening has a lot of positive effects, but we have to be careful that these developments don't limit the capacity of the actors who can really provide a value add in the industry to survive. So I'm hoping that we will continue seeing for a real diversity of actors that can really work towards the financial inclusion, which is what microfinance is, essentially there for. And this involves having some, smaller organizations who have that willingness, capacity, flexibility. As the microfinance institutions grow and get bigger, they get very bureaucratic, administrative. It's much more difficult to change, to evolve, to adapt, to go to these, exceptional areas. They're very much more standardized. And I think the charm of the smaller and medium-sized MFIs is their capacity to innovate, adapt, and really reach out to those populations. And if those underserved populations that are there today, even though there's such a mature, strong sector, well regulated, efficient, with strong professionals that really understand the business. It is those medium, in my mind, will have small and medium ones will have a strong role to play to further that financial inclusion in Cambodia.
I think financial inclusion is something that we work and we share the objective with the regulator, with the policymaker, with the government, and other international organizations. Is to get people having access to a form of financings, including insurance, including credit, deposit, as well as remittances and payment. So I think when you talk about financial inclusion, there's a big room for us to be able to contribute as an association, as well as from the microfinance institution perspective.
Okay. Well, I want to thank you both for coming on.
Thanks for having us.
It's been my delight to learn more about the industry, and I wish you well in your ever ongoing competition with in the banking sector. And I want to applaud you for serving a really important part of the market. As you say, I don't think people realize that this is underbanked. These are people that don't have access to financing, and they have small businesses, as you said, and they need working capital, and they need to grow their businesses, and they really can't walk into a commercial bank and say, I need a loan, and that's simply. So you guys are actually going out there, finding those people and educating them as well. I mean, the education plays a big part of it, and servicing this community.
Very popular in the industry, double bottom line strategy. It's not the only profitability that we after as an MFI. We're also working towards serving the society. In other words, contributing to the society.
That's fantastic. Thanks again. It was a pleasure to talk to both of you.
Thank you. It's
Thank you very much.